It's a fraught issue for Irish voters, and here to help us understand it is Naomi O'Leary in Dublin. She's an Irish journalist and host of the Irish Passport podcast. Also in the Irish capital, Dr. Siobhan Donahue is an Irish doctor and chairperson of Terminations for Medical Reasons, a group advocating for the repeal of the Eighth Amendment. Maeve O'Hanlon is a spokesperson for Love Both, a group advocating to keep the Eighth Amendment. And from Norwich in England, Helen Linehan is an abortion rights advocate. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Siobhan, let me start with you. Every year there's something like 3,000 women, Irish women, who travel to England to get abortions, to terminate pregnancies. Now, you have first-hand experience of this. You were one of those women at one time. Tell us how you found yourself seeking an abortion in another country.
Yes, indeed, I have this experience. It happened 7 years ago in 2011. I discovered that I was expecting my third child and was delighted with this news. And all was going well until we went for our 20-week anomaly scan. And at that scan, we discovered that our baby had a condition called anencephaly, where the top half of his head had never formed. Literally, there was nothing above his eye level, no scalp, no skull, no brain. And as a doctor, I knew that this meant that this baby would not survive. He would either die during the pregnancy. If he survived to delivery, he would die either at delivery or shortly after birth. And we were understandably, devastated at this news. It literally turned our world upside down. And after some consideration of how this would affect us as a family, we took the decision, the difficult decision, to travel to the UK to terminate the pregnancy at just under 22 weeks. And for me, it was that I could not face continuing this pregnancy. I could not see myself being able to operate normally within my life, to operate at all, really, because you would have those conversations with people everywhere you went. You know, people asking you about your due date, asking if you knew if you were having a boy or a girl, and what would you say to people? I mean, would you just play along and pretend everything was okay, or would you tell them the terrible truth? Would you tell them that you were preparing to have a funeral instead of a christening?
And was it was it that personal experience that led you to this decision now to be a supporter of this movement in Ireland right now to repeal the Eighth Amendment?
Very much so, because after this happened to me, at the time I had never heard anybody speaking about this, that this had happened to them. I'd never heard anybody ever speaking out about it. Until about 5 or 6 months after it happened to us, and I heard somebody speaking on the radio about it. And it was a lady who'd been through a similar experience, and she subsequently set up Terminations for Medical Reasons, and set up the support group that we run for parents who have had a diagnosis of a severe fatal fetal anomaly during their pregnancies. And I met with all of these people, all of these couples and women who had been through similar circumstances to mine. Some of them had continued with their pregnancies, some of them had terminated their pregnancies, but we all shared the diagnosis, we all shared the difficult decisions that we'd made, and you began to realise the hurt and the distress and the trauma that the Eighth Amendment caused to people in these circumstances. People who had much wanted pregnancies, but found themselves in a situation where they did not feel they could continue with those pregnancies, but they could not be looked after in their home country. And it was through that group, and as we moved on, we became an advocacy group as well as a support group. We spoke to our politicians, we told them our stories, and we moved them. We moved them to see that we should be looking after these couples and providing compassionate care for them.
All right, let me go to someone now who wants the country to retain the Eighth Amendment, and that is Maeve O'Hanlon. Maeve, when you listen to Siobhan's story there and what she went through, does it give you a little bit of pause to rethink your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we hear stories like Siobhan's, and we've heard quite a number of them in recent weeks, and it really does, it makes us think, it makes us wonder, how do we treat women in these situations? How do we support women in these situations? But what I think was really sad for me to hear about Siobhan's story was that she didn't find out until months after this about other parents who were in a similar situation. And I think a lot of Irish women have found themselves in that exact same situation where they didn't know the support that was out there. I have a friend who was in a similar situation. They got a diagnosis of anencephaly for their baby, so the same diagnosis. And they spoke about the same thing, that this is intense grief and the thought of how could they get through this. This friend Cleana and JP, her husband, they decided that, okay, they would give their child as much life as they could, and they would be with their child for as long as he lived. And he ended up living for 17 minutes after birth, and they said 17 minutes mightn't seem like a long time, but for them it was a lifetime of love. He got a lifetime of love in those 17 minutes. So what they've also been involved with is setting up support groups. So groups like One Day More and Every Life Counts. And I think it's really important actually that there are support groups for families who get these diagnoses, because it's a really difficult place to be. But I think it's really sad to hear that people get this diagnosis. In Ireland, often when people are given a diagnosis like that, they're told your baby might not live. Many people in your situation go to England, and they're not given any more support. Many women like Siobhan only discover after coming back, having lost their child, having had an abortion, that there was support. And I think that's something that it shouldn't be up to individual charity groups or small groups to provide support. I think that's a way that our government should actually be focusing on providing support to families, perinatal hospice care, funding these groups, so that any couple who gets a diagnosis like that, while they get the diagnosis and what the condition is like,
right,
but that they're also given a message of hope that they can continue, there is support, and they will be supported in that.
Helen, you are British. You're campaigning for a repeal of the Eighth Amendment. How did you arrive at your position, and what do you make of what you've just heard on both sides of this debate?
Well, I believe that women deserve a choice. This is about choice for women. I also had a diagnosis of a fatal fetal abnormality in our 12-week scan, and luckily I was in England when we received that diagnosis, and we were dealt with compassionally. We were told by the NHS doctors that this pregnancy will not survive birth, and I was given the choice to have a termination, and that's what we decided. And we then moved to Dublin, and as Siobhan was saying, we had no idea that this law existed in the Constitution of Ireland until I was telling another mum of my story, and she told me that one of her friends had been through the same experience but was legally bound to her pregnancy. She didn't have a choice, and she went ahead and had the trauma, I feel, of continuing with a pregnancy that was not going to survive. And I feel that mentally I would not have dealt with it very well. I'm not sure if our marriage would have survived if I had continued with that pregnancy. I think a lot of people would have been affected, my friends, close family, and I just think it's a medieval law. I think in any circumstance, abortion is a very private and personal decision to arrive at, and it's got no business being in part of a constitution in any country. And I think the No campaign, if they are successful, it's not going to prevent abortion in Ireland. It's going to continue, but women will continue to fly over here and access the abortion clinics in the UK. And it's not going to stop it. Abortion is always going to be needed. It will always be part of community, you know. And saying no, you can't, to the Irish women, is not going to stop. It's just going to make it more dangerous, especially for poor people who cannot afford to hop on a plane or a ferry. And women will continue to drink bleach. There'll be suicides. If you look at the statistics, they're horrendous. It's medieval, and it needs to change. And Ireland needs to grow up and become a modern society, especially, and to care for its women.
Naomi, there we heard Helen tell us there that this is a medieval law, this fact that it's enshrined in the Constitution of Ireland. You know, in some respects, Ireland is seen as a very progressive country. If you look at LGBT rights, you know, you can have same-sex marriage, was legalized in Ireland as well. But there are severe restrictions on abortion in Ireland right now. How do you think the country got to the point where it is now holding a referendum on this very controversial, divisive issue?
There has been a change in the country. From the early years of the Irish state, the Catholic Church had a very strong influence. In the initial years of Irish independence, the Catholic Church stepped in to provide a lot of services like education and healthcare. And what's been happening in Ireland in the last 2 decades is that a more progressive country that's emerged has been grappling with the legacy of that. So under the EU, as an EU member, Ireland has become a much more diverse, a more progressive country. And particularly a younger generation has been challenging issues that have been written into the Constitution that would contain within them, you know, an assumption of Catholic morality. There's also been a loss in faith in the Catholic Church. Church attendance is down. Its reputation has been very much shaken by a series of scandals. And what you had in 2015 was the gay marriage referendum, in which Ireland voted by a majority to legalise same-sex marriage, which was a huge shift for a country where homosexuality was only legalised in 1993 and divorced shortly after that. So Ireland has had a rapid change in pace over the last 2 or 3 decades, and this is the latest chapter in that story.
Siobhan, what is the current situation in Ireland concerning abortions? If a woman wants an abortion, or if medical experts feel that we have to abort this fetus, what happens then?
Sure. Well, the only provision for abortion in Ireland at the moment is if there is a substantial risk to the life of the mother. This is something that it is difficult to for a lot of doctors to decide exactly when that happens. And we had the case in 2012 of Savita Halappanavar, who was having an inevitable miscarriage, but because her fetus continued to have a heartbeat, she was unable to have an abortion. She was told, no, this is a Catholic country. And they waited, and she got sicker and sicker, and she developed sepsis, and then she died. Now, there have been a number of factors attributed to her death, and it is partly due to the sepsis, but it has also been said in the report that had she been able to have a abortion when she actually had requested it, that it would almost certainly have saved her life. So that is where things stand at the moment.
I think it's
so for somebody like myself who feels that they cannot continue with a pregnancy. And I think I understand that certain people in my situation would choose to continue with the pregnancy. I understand that, but I think it's very unfair to assume that everybody feels the same and that everybody is able to face that. I mean, I could see how my mental health would be affected, how my ability to function would be affected. I knew that if I kept going, that it would break me. And I have seen people and friends of mine who've had similar diagnoses, and they have continued because they have been unable to travel.
Right.
And how they have suffered, how they have literally curled up in a ball on their couch, waiting for their baby's heartbeat to stop, have not been able to look after their children, have not been able to function, and how it has had long-term effects on them. They've developed mental health issues, they've needed treatment for post-traumatic stress and other issues like that. It has taken them a long time to recover. And what I know, I've heard Helen Linehan telling her story before, and what I've always been struck by is the fact that she does not tell the story with the level of trauma that the Irish women tell their story, and that is the truth of it. The trauma is not from the diagnosis. The diagnosis like this will continue to happen. These medical science is not at a place where it's able to stop these things from happening. But what is the issue is it's the travel. You'll be able to move on from the grief of losing your baby. That's something that you can move on from and you can come to accept. I mean, that's something I have accepted, that my baby had a diagnosis, and there was nothing I could do about that.
Right.
But the fact that I had to leave my own country to access healthcare, to be looked after in this situation, that is the part of this that I find traumatic, that I find hurtful. That there is the blunt instrument of the Constitution is used to prevent people like me making a decision in my own country. What I feel is if we can remove this 8th Amendment, we can offer all options to people so that a doctor could sit down with somebody like me in a circumstance like this and say, here's your diagnosis, here is the prognosis, and then say to them, what would you like to do? How would you like to proceed? So that somebody like, has been mentioned, if they wanted to continue with the pregnancy, can say, I wish to continue. And the doctor can say, that's fine, and support them. And absolutely, we need more supports for those people. but nobody's going to take that right away from them.
Right.
But what I feel is if we can remove the 8th Amendment, we will then be able to legislate to allow somebody like me to say, I'm sorry, I cannot continue. I want to terminate this pregnancy now.
Okay.
I feel that's a win-win scenario because anybody who wants to continue can, and anybody who doesn't will be able not to.
So, Maeve, here we have a situation where Ireland does make provision for abortions to be carried out, where life is in danger. But what about circumstances where, you know, as we've heard, where there are fetal abnormalities or in cases of rape? What happens then?
Well, I'm happy to address those in a moment, but I think it's really important to make one point, that in Ireland, we've been having a debate about abortion intensely in the last few weeks, but it's been ongoing quite a lot in the last year. And about a huge majority of the attention during these discussions has been about these really rare, tragic cases of pregnancy as a result of rape or a diagnosis of a life-limiting condition. And while I actually believe that from people that I have spoken to who have had different experiences to Siobhan and Helen in similar circumstances, that I believe that there are many more compassionate options than abortion. But I think it's important to say that the vast majority of abortions do not take place in those circumstances. The vast majority of abortions are actually due to socioeconomic reasons, where a woman doesn't feel supported in her education, maybe that she feels she has to choose between continuing her education and having a child, or between a job and a child, or she's afraid she won't be able to support her child, or if she gets a diagnosis of a disability for her child, that she's afraid the support services won't be there. And tragically in Ireland, in the debate we've been having, we have had very little discussion about that reality. And those are things that we actually have some control over. And we don't have a lot of control over whether somebody will be raped or not, or whether they get a diagnosis of a life-limiting condition. But for the 97% of abortions that happen on socio and economic grounds, there is a lot we can do. And in Ireland in recent years, our government has had citizens' assemblies, Oireachtas committees, they've passed legislation, we've had government hearings, we're now having a referendum, and all of those have been focused exclusively on trying to legalise abortion. Our government hasn't stopped to look and take a step back and say, okay, why are women having abortions? What are the reasons? And what can we do about it? How can we better support them? And I feel that in this debate in Ireland, there's a real missed opportunity to address the reasons why women have abortions and to provide supports. Because we know that the 8th Amendment hasn't stopped every abortion, but we have a fraction of the abortions in Ireland that they have in other countries. In Ireland, we have around an estimated 4,000 abortions a year, including abortion pills. In countries like Scotland and Norway, which have a very similar population to Ireland, they have between 12 and 15,000 abortions every year. That's 3 times what we have in Ireland. So many women in the pro-life movement actually say, well, you know, I was in that situation, I had an unplanned pregnancy, I panicked. If there had been an abortion clinic down the road, my little girl wouldn't be here. Okay. So I think we have to acknowledge that the 8th Amendment has saved lives, and we all want fewer abortions, but the only way to achieve that is actually to step back, look at the root cause. Why are women having abortions, and how else can we support them as a society? Okay,
let me bring in Helen. Helen, you want to say something?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's nobody's business. If you, as I said earlier, abortion is a very personal and distressing conclusion to arrive at in any circumstance, okay? And it's got no business being in the Constitution. It's got no business being in government. It is a choice for women. This is women's health care. There are thousands of women having abortions. You want to know why they're having abortions? It's none of your business. There are thousands of reasons to have them, and the 8th Amendment does not stop abortion. So if this campaign is unsuccessful and the 8th Amendment remains in the Constitution, women will continue to be turned away by their country in Ireland, and they will fly over here to UK to access our system, which is preposterous, and it's more traumatic for the women and the families of the people going through it. It is absolutely the 8th Amendment does not stop abortion. Okay. It just makes it more dangerous for the women who need to access abortion clinics, and that is why there are places like BPAS over here that offer discounted abortions for Irish women that are having to fly over here. it's preposterous.
Right. Okay.
Can I just make two
Maeve, go ahead.
responses to that, please? There are two really important points I think I would like to make here. The first is that abortion is not healthcare. Healthcare is about saving and protecting lives, and in the vast majority of abortions, we're talking about a healthy baby being carried by a healthy mother, and we're asking doctors and nurses to intervene to end the life of a child, an unborn child.
Go ahead, Maeve.
We're asking doctors and nurses who are trained to save lives, to heal, to end the
Helen, I will
lives
come to you in a
of
moment.
unborn children.
Diagnosed, my pregnancy was diagnosed with a fatal abnormality, okay? And I received healthcare and advice and counselling and compassion and emotion from my country. I received that, and I was delighted. I didn't realise at the time, but I was very, very lucky, because I was diagnosed on the Friday and I had a termination on the Tuesday. And for me then, those days dragged on, and it was hell. And then when I found out about the Eighth Amendment in Ireland a couple of years later, I've just found it was outrageous.
Okay,
and it's the reason that we left. My husband is Irish, and that's the reason we left.
Okay,
Ireland.
let me give Maeve a chance to respond to that. Go ahead, and if you could be brief, please, Maeve.
Yeah, so as I said, healthcare is saving lives, protecting lives. Abortion stops a beating heart every time and ends a life. And to expect medics to do that when they're trained to save lives is something that a lot of Irish doctors and nurses are finding really difficult, to come to this idea that they might be required to end the lives of one of their patients. But the other important point I wanted to make is that our Constitution is the place where we protect human rights. Sorry, Helen, if I may just finish this point, that in our Eighth Amendment, we acknowledge the right to life of an unborn child and the mother, and we acknowledge there's a balancing act. What we're being asked to do in Ireland at the moment is to remove a human right to life from a whole group of unborn babies, a whole group of humans, to say that some human life has value and some doesn't. And that is a step too far for Irish people who want to support both mothers and babies.
Okay. Siobhan, what do you make of this argument that abortions are not, it's not healthcare, healthcare is about saving people's lives?
Yeah, I mean, healthcare is not exclusively about saving. I mean, that discounts all hospice care. That's not about saving people's lives. But from the issue of abortion, there are a large number, over 1,500 doctors have signed a petition to support repeal of the Eighth Amendment in this country. There are a huge number of doctors in this country who want to provide abortion care to their patients. They recognise that in a small percentage of pregnancies, where there is a crisis of some degree, either through a diagnosis discovered during the pregnancy or for whatever reason that there is a crisis, they recognise that patients in these circumstances require abortion care. Nobody wants to have an abortion. I didn't want to have an abortion, but I didn't get the option that I wanted. I wanted to bring home a baby. That was not an option for me. So I chose for me what was the least worst option.
But that's not the debate we're having. That's not the question that's being asked in our referendum.
Well, it is part of it.
What we're being asked is not to deal with
it. Bring Naomi into this conversation. Naomi, we won't know the final result of this referendum until Saturday, but going into this vote, into this poll, polling in Ireland showed that there are more people, marginally more people, on the yes side, that is, people who want to repeal the Eighth Amendment. But there are also very large numbers of people who are undecided. Does that surprise you that there's so much indecision about an issue like this right on the eve of the vote?
I think it's understandable that there's a large number of undecideds, because this is an issue about which people feel extremely passionate, and we've heard that in the conversation so far. It touches on extremely intimate aspects of people's lives, and it's a lot for people to take on. And we have a long history of debating this issue, and it has been a journey for many people. Even political parties are leaving a free vote in many cases so that politicians can make an individual conscious decision on it. What's important to note about the polls is, though there has been a majority that's been showing up in the polls since the start of the year consistently for change, it's very difficult for pollsters to estimate with certainty how people are on this, because they don't have anything to compare it to. Because the last time anything like this was voted on was 2003, Usually in an election or something like that, pollsters can calibrate their results according to how people voted the previous time.
Okay.
But now there's an extra element of uncertainty, and on top of that, a lot will come down to turnout. A lot of politicians on both sides are thinking that it will be close no matter what the result is.
Okay, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CGTN America, or visit us on Facebook. That's at facebook.com/CGTN America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.